Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our news conference. I'm Doug Wood, the Associate Director of Grassroots Environmental Education, and our nonprofit organization is happy to provide the technical assistance for a series of webinars and news events in support of the Ratepayer Protection Nuclear Moratorium Act currently being considered by the New York State Legislature. And with that short intro, I'm delighted to turn the program over to the Honorable New York State Assemblywoman Joanne Simon.
Hi, I'm Assemblymember Joanne Simon, and I am the lead sponsor in the assembly of our bill. So just a little quick overview why we are doing this. It's been 38 years since a nuclear reactor was built in New York State. This bill would continue that pause with a temporary 2.5-year moratorium on the use of taxpayer or ratepayer funds to support the development of new nuclear power facilities in New York State. During this period, the bill creates an independent nuclear assessment task force to conduct a comprehensive, transparent, and evidence-based evaluation of the financial, environmental, public health, and energy system impacts of nuclear energy, especially on disadvantaged communities. The CAC in 2022, that's the Climate Action Council scoping plan, cautioned that the future role of nuclear power has not been demonstrated and should be rigorously evaluated before expansion is pursued. There's no publicly available comprehensive financial, environmental, health, and safety assessment that has ever been conducted. New Yorkers deserve to have an assessment done before embarking on 5 reactors estimated to cost $20 billion each, based on the Georgia reactors, the only ones that have been built in America in the last 30 years. New York State ratepayers deserve to have an expert assessment done before Governor Hochul's 5 proposed nuclear reactors move forward. And here's a key reason for the bill. We just found out via FOIL request that the Boston Consulting Group stated in their recent proposal to NYPA, which is the New York Power Authority, on the new reactor that 100% plus capital cost overruns are common on new nuclear builds. That's why the legislature needs to pass this bill and require an expert, evidence-based financial assessment of nuclear power first. So today, I'm very excited to be joined by Gregory Jaczko. Gregory Jaczko served as the chairman of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission under President Barack Obama from 2009 to 2012. Dr. Jaczko focused on the safety of existing nuclear reactors and radioactive materials, implementing a predictable safety review process for license applications, ensuring that the agency conducts thorough environmental reviews, and promoting strong enforcement and accountability. Dr. Jaczko led efforts to strengthen security regulations for nuclear power plants. His professional career has been devoted to science and its use and impact in the public policy arena. Immediately prior to assuming the post of commissioner, Dr. Jaczko served as appropriations director for U.S. Senator Harry Reid and also served as the senator's science policy advisor. He began his Washington, D.C. career as a congressional science fellow in the office of U.S. Representative Ed Markey. In addition, he has been an adjunct professor at Georgetown University teaching science and policy. He was born in Pennsylvania and raised in upstate New York, so we consider him a New Yorker. Dr. Jaczko earned a bachelor's degree in physics and philosophy from our own Cornell University and a doctorate in physics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Jaczko, please share with us. Thank you. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you for that kind introduction. And yes, I grew up most of my childhood in Albany, so in and around the capital. So it's a pleasure to be with all of you this morning, and thank you, Assemblymember Simon, for this bill, which I think is really a fantastic initiative. I look at everything that's going on today, and I look back in my time as chairman, where the country was in the midst of what the industry labeled the nuclear renaissance, and it was really a craze of the early 2000s, in which the industry promised tens of new reactors would be built in this country. The industry promised those reactors. The Congress provided massive subsidies at the federal level and reforms to the regulatory process to grease the skids to make this as easy as possible. The result was a significant failure. Only 2 reactors were built at a significant cost in Georgia. And in fact, another 2 reactors were under construction and canceled after 4 of the people involved in that project were indicted for federal fraud. So in fact, the result of that renaissance in the 2000s was more fraud convictions than actual reactors constructed. But there were billions and billions of dollars wasted of taxpayer money and of ratepayer money in Georgia. We know the challenges of building large reactors, and we knew at the time those challenges. So the industry also at that time embarked on this notion of small modular reactors. And the federal government then, and many other states then latched onto that as the next great hope for nuclear power in this country. And in fact, none of those small modular reactor designs that received significant federal funds back in that era were ever built or constructed. In fact, none of them, despite what you often hear, actually have approved designs from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So I find it ironic that here we are today in the midst of more euphoria, more promises about the resurgence of nuclear power in this country. And this evolving industry promises yet again that nuclear power will be the panacea to meet our electricity needs, which are driven in many ways by a significant demand from data centers and other new demand on the grid. And of course, in some places, still a desire to have carbon-free electricity. Yet the fundamental technological challenges of nuclear power remain the same as they were almost 20 years ago when I first embarked on dealing with this technology. And in many ways, I think they're worse than they were 20 years ago today. We have an industry that's largely promulgated by technology companies that have very little experience in the nuclear arena, and by, at the federal level, certainly an administration that has very little regard for regulation, safety, or really the environment. So I think these combinations don't bode well for ultimately what will be taxpayer and federal dollars being misused and wasted again. And this policy agenda, or this current environment, is driven more by promise and propaganda than facts. And I think that's why your bill, the Ratepayer Nuclear Moratorium Act, is so vital, because it will try and get to the facts of what really nuclear can provide and at what cost and with what challenges. If people want to know, those challenges are well known, but too often it seems like people don't want to know. And that's why it's crucial that a comprehensive study like this is done, so that the people in New York State will understand exactly what they're getting into. And likely what they're getting into is a lot of expensive bills and very little new power. But I just want to go through very briefly some of those key challenges that remain today. The biggest, of course, is just the economic viability. History has shown over and as the report that you identified from BCG showed, that consistently nuclear power plants are more expensive and take longer to build than promised. That has been the case throughout the history of this industry. In fact, I have an anecdote related to that. Back in 2005, the last time, when I was associated with significant efforts for the Congress to provide new subsidies for nuclear power, the Congressional Budget Office did an assessment of the likelihood of reactors that would be subsidized by the federal government actually developing power, or actually ever being constructed. And they found it would be about 50%. That turned out to be spot on. But the proponents at the time challenged that assessment, said it couldn't be true. And in fact, it was, and it was based on the historical record. So this BCG report is nothing new. This has been the case throughout the entire history of this industry. And the fact is that to overcome those challenges, then governments, state governments, federal governments turn to ratepayers and taxpayers to subsidize this industry to make what is an incredibly risky endeavor possible. And that simply has to stop. And again, that's a fantastic reason for this task force that your bill would establish to take a look at these issues. Another issue that's significant, and that is the issue of nuclear waste. We still do not have a permanent repository for nuclear waste in this country, and every community and every policymaker that wants to support nuclear power has to be honest with the communities and acknowledge that nuclear waste will stay in those communities perhaps forever. People don't want to talk about it. They still want to cling to some notion of a federal repository that is highly unlikely, I think, to ever materialize. So that has to be front and center of any discussion about nuclear power. Are you as a community comfortable with that nuclear waste staying there for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years? And that's a transparency that few people will talk about. And finally, of course, the biggest challenge really that we deal with from an energy and environment perspective these days is climate change. And despite the fact that electricity from nuclear power does not directly produce carbon emissions, nuclear power is the worst solution for climate in this country. We know we have readily accessible alternatives with renewables that can be deployed immediately to meet what is a significant spike in demand. I see it here. I live in Washington, D.C., and our electricity bills are just skyrocketing because of data center development in surrounding communities and the resultant need for rapid deployments of new energy and new electricity technology. Nuclear will not meet that promise. It is simply too expensive and it takes too long to deploy. So again, these are just some of the kind of known facts, but it will be great to have this bill passed and to have this task force set up to delve into these issues in depth and really create a comprehensive record to show the challenges of any significant nuclear deployment. And I think the governor and every policymaker in New York State who supports this initiative owes it to the ratepayers to get to the bottom of these facts and present a clear picture of what is on the line for what could be. And you said, I think kindly, 5 reactors at $20 billion. But when you add that together, we're talking over $100 billion that is on the backs of ratepayers and taxpayers. And I don't think there's any private company that would take on that burden. And we've seen that in the country. Nuclear companies are not, or energy companies are really not willing to take on that challenge without federal or state subsidies. That, I think, tells you everything you need to know, because in a way, they're really the experts on what can work, and they know the details, but they keep those details private. This task force would make those details public. So I'm thrilled to be here today to talk about this, and I urge the legislature to pass this act as soon as possible and get the facts on the table so people can make an informed decision about a nuclear power future in New York. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jaczko, for sharing your experience and your wisdom with us today. I'm hoping that every member of the legislature will take the time to listen to what you had to say. It's so important. I want to remind our media folks, if you have a question for either of our speakers, if you put your name and your media affiliation in the chat, we will call on you during the Q&A session right after our second speaker. Speaking of which, I'm delighted to introduce David Schlissel. He is an MIT-trained engineer and Stanford University-trained lawyer. He's provided expert testimony in hundreds of legal cases involving utilities and their plans for power. David is the president of Schlissel Technical Consulting, and it's my pleasure now to introduce David Schlissel.
Thank you. Good morning. Before I start, I'd like to mention that I grew up in Long Beach, New York, and actually in the 1970s and early 1980s, I lived and worked in Albany, New York. Good morning. I'm going to address 4 what I believe are key questions related to why the legislature needs to pass the Nuclear Moratorium Act. First, why did the state energy plan produced in 2025 choose new reactors? That's simple. A number of overly optimistic and unrealistic assumptions about the cost of new reactors were made in developing the plan. And once that happened, the results were baked in. One of the key assumptions was that new reactors would not experience any cost overruns or schedule delays. This assumption is contrary to the history of the nuclear industry since 1970. And as Assemblywoman Simon mentioned, even a consultant to NYPA, the Boston Consulting Group, warned about, in its proposal, has warned about that 100% plus capital cost overruns are the norm for new reactors. And no one's provided any evidence as to why that won't continue to be the norm in the future. Second, why is the state hiding the results of 2 nuclear reports from its citizens? NYPA and NYSERDA each paid 2 consulting firms in 2025 to prepare what we believe are assessments of the plans to move forward with new reactors. However, both state authorities have refused to make these reports public. In response to a Freedom of Information Act request, NYPA has made available a heavily redacted version of the proposal submitted by one of the consulting firms seeking to be hired to prepare the report. That's the Boston Consulting Group. If it wasn't so serious, it would be laughable. Their report is probably close to half blacked out. But still, NYPA and NYSERDA refuse to provide the two reports that they've funded. Why? The reasonable assumption is that the reports contain information that does not support the plan to build new reactors. There's no other logical explanation. Otherwise, NYPA and NYSERDA would be rushing out the door to release the board reports to the public. Third, why does New York need a nuclear moratorium? That's also simple. The state, including NYPA, apparently at the governor's direction, is rushing ahead with a plan to build the new reactors without any public financial assessment of the impact of that plan on the affordability of electricity for New York citizens. The Moratorium Act is needed because the state is not willing to do what any fiscally responsible government or business would do before embarking on a plan that could cost $100 billion or more. That is, the state or business would conduct an evidence-based financial assessment of the risks of the plan against realistic and lower cost alternatives. The state energy plan certainly did not do any of that. Finally, what will happen if the legislature does not pass the Nuclear Moratorium Act? Again, the answer is simple. Without the act, NYPA would have a blank check to rush ahead, perhaps as soon as later this year, to issue bonds for at least one of the proposed reactors that would lock the state and its citizens into paying an estimated $20 billion or more for each new reactor, with history showing that the costs of those that reactor or those reactors will soon soar and delays are inevitable. Bottom line, there's no reason to rush into this. The state needs to stop, look in all directions, and then move ahead cautiously with a plan that has the lowest financial cost and lowest financial risk for the state and its citizens. The risks are too great to rush ahead recklessly without a public and transparent financial assessment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David Schlissel. We had a couple of questions that have come in through the chat. And again, let me remind media people who are here, if you want to ask your own question, just put your name and your affiliation in the chat, and we'd be happy to bring you in. We had a question regarding drone technology and how that has changed the calculus for the potential danger of storing nuclear waste on site, Greg, as you were talking about, that may have to be there for thousands of years. Do you have a comment about that?
Yeah, there are security and well, I think the bigger issue I don't think is necessarily drone technology. I think the bigger issue is the current administration's approach to any and all regulation. In principle, a healthy, well-functioning nuclear regulatory commission would be able to address emergent threats of any kind to spent fuel or to other nuclear technology. Spent fuel casts are generally regulated in a passive way when it comes to security, meaning that the expectation is that radiation releases, you have a big enough boundary that radiation releases would be limited from a cask, an incident at a cask. But in principle, the NRC is constantly evaluating new threat vectors, which drones could be one of. But I would say that in the current environment, I don't have the kind of confidence I would normally have that the NRC would take the right actions to address those kinds of new novel threats.
Thank you so much. Beth, can we bring in Tim Knaus from the Syracuse Post-Standard to ask his question, please?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, my understanding is that NYSERDA is developing this nuclear master plan, and that part of that looks at the financial outlook of how they'd be financed and paid for, and what the risk to ratepayers is that not part of their mandate?
I'm not aware of what exactly their mandate is, but from your description, it sounds like they're looking at how to do it. They're not looking at whether to do it. And that's the first question that needs to be answered. And I've not heard anything about NYSERDA doing anything that's transparent and in the public view and allowing for experts who might disagree to participate.
Can I pop another question while I'm on?
Sure, go ahead.
France is often held up as kind of the example of how to succeed with nuclear. Can you guys give a kind of a quick assessment of why that might not be a good example?
Well, France built 56 reactors of fairly similar design, and over the time they built it, the cost of each reactors went up in real terms, went up higher than the rate of inflation. Then, within, I'd say, the last decade, certainly within the last decade, the operation of those reactors has called into question as climate change and higher temperature has led to the need to stop operating the reactors at times. And also, they've developed metal corrosion issues common to all of the reactors. More recently, France built a large new reactor which was finished at least 4 times what was originally estimated to cost, and it was years late in being completed. That's the recent history of nuclear power. You don't have to look back to the 70s or to even Vogel, but it's happening elsewhere in the world as well.
I have a question, and I want to get this question to Assemblymember Simon before she has to leave. Sam King with the New York Public News Network asks, how do you plan to make your case to your fellow lawmakers with so little time left?
Well, that's a great question. Well, we're talking about it. We're doing this series of webinars. We are talking about moratoriums on a couple of things. We have a week left after the budget passes, which should be passed by Thursday. So one of the things I'm doing is trying to get this on an agenda, to get this bill to the floor so that we can vote on it. In reality, it's going to be a challenge. On the other hand, sometimes we can do things very quickly. Sometimes we take forever. Other times we can do things very quickly. I think that a lot of people are very concerned about the way the budget treated the CLCPA. Many people expressed their concerns about the sort of rollback of the CLCPA, and has really encouraged a number of things that we can do to start implementing renewables, but also to do a moratorium on data centers because they eat up so much energy, and we need to look at that. But also looking at nuclear. I don't think that there's a lot of people very supportive of nuclear energy, but there's also a lot that they don't know. I think the vast majority of members are very concerned about it, and something like a moratorium makes sense. It's very rational. It makes a lot of sense to people, so they can say, look, I'm not against nuclear, whatever, but we need to know what it's going to cost. We're talking about affordability here. That's been the big agenda. And we don't know that nuclear will, in fact, reduce costs. So we need to look at it and have a robust assessment of that. I think that's very important. I think that neither NYPA nor NYSERDA have the ability, the independence to do that kind of review. And I think that's also critically important and a really important part of why we should pass this bill.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Joanne Simon, for joining us today. I know you've got a really, really busy day, so we're going to let you go if you have to, but thank you again for joining us and being part of this important news conference. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I want to turn to Tricia Crimmins from Morning Brew. Tricia, are you with us, and would you like to ask your question?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. My question is for Greg. In the kind of tech and energy reporting space, the idea that data centers are driving up energy costs for surrounding communities has really entered the public consciousness, and public opinion is responding to that, like in real time. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about why maybe folks aren't as angry about nuclear reactors doing the same thing yet, if they will be, and kind of the comparisons between both data centers and nuclear reactors driving up energy costs for surrounding communities.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So one of the big differences, quite frankly, is that data centers don't provide a lot to local communities other than tax revenue. They don't provide jobs. They have very minimal employment enhancement. Nuclear reactors do, and often very high-paying jobs, sometimes in rural communities. So there isn't a local economic incentive for reactors, but I think the broader question of why one is driving up costs is, versus the other. I mean, I think that, is the fundamental issue. And for whatever reason, nuclear skates by on this fact that it is the most expensive way to add electrons to the grid today. You look in New York State, they have pushed back some of their deadlines for their clean energy goals because of cost concerns. Well, the last thing you would want to do then is build nuclear reactors, because that is invariably going to be the most expensive way to add carbon-free electricity, certainly to the grid, and any electricity to the grid for that matter. So I think it's, a lot of it is that this endeavor is driven by hype. It's driven by propaganda. It's driven a lot by the tech community, which has tremendous goals to build and expand data centers without really any rational control over that. And then the answer often to how they're going to meet the electricity needs is they're going to turn to nuclear. And it's, in both cases, they're undeveloped certainly in the case of the nuclear, it's an undeveloped technology. So as I always say, you can always say what the price of a new reactor will be because nobody's ever built one to show that it's not. And as is always the case with nuclear, whatever that price is that's projected, it will usually be more, double or more than that typically. So I think we're operating in an information space right now where the facts are not breaking through, which, again, is why this bill would be so important to really in-depth look at these issues and establish on the record what the facts are about nuclear deployment. And when you get into those facts, the answer is almost always it takes longer and it will cost more and it has all these other challenges.
Thank you so much.
If I could just add, the reality is that the data center bubble is likely to burst at some point. And either lots of data centers that are being proposed or discussed now are being discussed. The same data centers are being proposed in multiple states. That the demand will not grow, is unlikely to grow as fast as many are predicting. We lived through this in the 70s, 1970s, the first decade of this century. 150 new coal plants were proposed that were canceled. Why? Because the cost of building them went up and the electric demand on which they were predicated never developed. It's likely the same thing will happen with reactors. The problem is the cost of building them, even partially, is so dramatic that you don't want to have the state start new reactors that never get finished. That's the Shoreham story. Was it a $5 billion reactor that never got operated?
Yeah. Exactly. Thank you, David. Alex Galt, if you are on from the Watertown Daily Times, if you're in, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. The U.S. military is working on something called Project Janus. It aims to put small modular nuclear reactors on military posts around the U.S. They've got their eye on Fort Drum as one of those places. Just curious if you have any familiarity with that push, if you have the same concerns with the U.S. military's expansion of nuclear energy that you would have with the states.
I can start. There are a couple of differences. You're right, the state probably can't block that, but the military doesn't care about cost. Okay? I speak to legislators around the country frequently, and one of their questions almost all the time is, well, wait a minute, the nuclear navy, they build reactors they've been building reactors for submarines since what, the 50s? The Navy doesn't care about cost, but the state of New York should care about cost because its taxpayers ultimately foot the bill. And the military doesn't care about new technologies, or they do, but if it fails, it's a drop in the bucket of the cost of our annual military budgets. So I don't think it really has much relevance to the question of whether New York State should build 5 large reactors.
Greg, any closing thoughts before we close up today?
Well, on that question, I think David answered well. This is a microreactor. This is not a practical solution for commercial electricity deployment because we know as expensive as nuclear reactors are, the smaller you make them, they become proportionally even more expensive. So, these are propaganda goals more than they are practical electricity solutions. And this notion that the U.S. military is going to deploy microreactors across the world, I think is fanciful at the end of the day, because it's, if we're talking about for deployment during active combat, it is a very hazardous technology in that case. And so the use cases are not clear to me. It's more an effort to try and demonstrate some forward progress, but as a practical solution for the commercial space, these kinds of projects have no relevance at all.
Okay, we are reaching the attention span limit of most people, and so we've got so much great information today. I think we're going to close the event where we are. I want to especially thank Dr. Gregory Jaczko and David Schlissel for their unbelievable expertise and for sharing that with us today. Also want to thank Assemblymember Simon for joining us and Senator Parker for being the co-sponsor in the Senate of this really important bill. Thanks to all of you who joined us today. We appreciate your interest in this issue. You'll find lots of more information about this at the website that we've set up, which is nynuclearmoratorium.org. Again, nynuclearmoratorium.org. Thank you so much for attending, everyone, today. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks.